At America's most brutal sniper range, a top-tier SEAL mocked the silent janitor. History was just made. Mop it up. But when she quietly asked for a chance to shoot, the entire training ground fell into stunned silence. The Mojave sun beat down on Fort Irwin with a merciless, white-hot intensity, baking the cracked earth of the training grounds known only as the Crucible. This was where America's most lethal marksmen were forged, in a furnace of swirling dust, relentless discipline, and the distant, percussive echo of high-caliber rifles. Rows of sand-colored, windowless buildings shimmered in the heat, their classified purpose shielded by layers of razor wire and the highest levels of security clearance. Inside the polished corridors of Range House 7, Elara Vance moved with an almost unnerving efficiency. A woman of 30, with pale skin that seemed to defy the desert sun and light brown hair pulled back into a severe, practical bun, she was utterly invisible. Dressed in a plain gray maintenance uniform, she guided her mop across the linoleum floors, her movements precise, economical, and devoid of any wasted motion. The way she sectioned the floor into quadrants, the consistent pressure of her strokes, it was a routine executed with a kind of silent, military-grade precision. Yet, to the elite operators and decorated officers who strode past, their boots echoing with purpose, she was just part of the facility's background machinery. As she worked, fragmented images flickered at the edges of her consciousness like a faulty projector. The cold, cross-hatched texture of a rifle grip against her palm, the smell of gun oil and cordite, hushed conversations in sterile white rooms with figures whose faces remained maddeningly blurry. She had long ago learned to dismiss them as meaningless static, ghosts of a life she couldn't grasp. A loud burst of laughter and backslapping erupted from the main observation deck overlooking the range. Lieutenant Jackson Jax Ryder, a Navy SEAL with a physique that seemed sculpted for recruitment posters and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, was holding court. His perfectly coiffed hair and expensive tactical watch seemed out of place, yet he wore his arrogance like a second uniform. 5 targets, variable wind, under 5 seconds. A new Crucible record, Jax announced, his voice loud enough for everyone, including Elara, to hear. He spotted her working near the entrance. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, tossing an empty energy gel packet onto the floor she had just cleaned. It landed with a sticky little smack. "You missed a spot. Gotta keep the place clean for the real warriors." A few of the younger operators snickered. Elara said nothing. She didn't even look up. She simply maneuvered her cart over, bent down, and picked up the trash, her expression as neutral as the gray walls around her. But for a fleeting moment, her gaze lingered on Jax's custom rifle resting on the rack. It wasn't a look of awe or envy, but one of cold professional assessment. The moment was so brief that only one person caught it. Gunnery Sergeant Elias Thorne, the master instructor of the Crucible, stood slightly apart from the celebrating group. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles carved by years, squinting down scopes in sun-blasted war zones, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. He saw the janitor's momentary focus, the subtle shift in her posture. He filed it away, a tiny, insignificant anomaly in a day filled with predictable outcomes. He watched as she returned to her mopping, a ghost in the machine, her presence as quiet and constant as the desert wind whistling outside. The day wore on, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Jax, still riding the high of his record-breaking performance, grew bolder in his casual cruelty. As Elara cleaned the equipment racks near the firing line, he strode past and accidentally knocked over a container of brass casings, sending them scattering across the concrete with a loud, metallic clatter. "Whoops," he said, flashing a disingenuous smile. "Clumsy me. Be a doll and get those, will you?" Several of the SEALs exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none dared to challenge their team's alpha. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, observing from his elevated platform, narrowed his eyes. He noted the way Elara simply retrieved a dustpan and brush and began the tedious task of collecting the dozens of casings without a word of complaint, her movements still maddeningly precise. But then, as she knelt, something extraordinary happened. To steady herself, she placed one hand on the shooting bench and shifted her weight. Her body, for a split second, fell into a perfect weaver stance, a classic aggressive shooting position. Shoulders squared, arms creating a perfect push-pull tension, head slightly tilted. It was a flawless, textbook replication of the exact form Thorn had been drilling into his operators all morning. It was unconscious, reflexive, and it lasted no longer than a heartbeat before she returned to her task. But Thorn saw it, and this time he didn't dismiss it. When the range finally broke for the midday meal, the operators retreated into the air-conditioned mess hall, their loud banter fading into the shimmering heat. Elara remained behind, tasked with clearing the trash from the firing line. The range fell silent, leaving only the sound of the wind whipping through the distant target stands. She stood at the empty firing line, alone. Slowly, her hands came up, her right hand forming a pistol grip, her left supporting an imaginary barrel. Her eyes, no longer downcast, scanned the distant targets with an intense, analytical focus. Her thumb made a tiny, phantom movement, mimicking the release of a safety catch. Her index finger extended, hovering as if caressing a trigger. "See something interesting out there?" Thorn's voice, gravelly and quiet, cut through the silence. He had returned early, his curiosity getting the better of him. Elara's hands dropped to her sides instantly, her entire body stiffening. She hadn't heard his approach. She kept her eyes fixed downrange, her voice barely a whisper. The heat shimmer off that rock formation. It's creating a thermal updraft. Target 4 needs a quarter-minute right adjustment to compensate. Thorn's weathered face, usually a mask of stoicism, registered a flicker of pure shock before settling back into its customary neutrality. He followed her gaze to the distant steel plate, shimmering like a mirage. The calculation was not just accurate. It was the kind of intuitive, high-level read that separated elite snipers from merely great ones. "And how would you know that?" he asked, his tone carefully level. Elara said nothing. She simply turned, retrieved her cleaning cart, and began pushing it toward the next building, leaving Thorn alone on the firing line, the janitor's impossible words echoing in the vast, empty silence of the desert. Later that afternoon, the oppressive heat was broken by the arrival of a sleek, black SUV that rolled to a stop near the main observation tower. The operators, who had been lounging in the shade, snapped to attention. Out stepped General Madsen, a stern, silver-haired man whose 2 stars glittered on his collar. His presence instantly electrified the atmosphere of the crucible. "Gunny," Madsen greeted Thorn with a curt nod. "I was told your boys were making some noise today. Show me what you've got." This was the moment Jax had been waiting for. With the general watching, he stepped forward, his confidence radiating like heat off the asphalt. "General, Lieutenant Ryder, happy to demonstrate." He took his position at the firing line, the picture of calm lethality. His performance was even more flawless than his morning run. 5 shots, fired in a rapid, controlled sequence. All 5 landed dead center on their respective targets. The digital scoreboard above the range flashed, confirming a new official base record. A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the assembled officers. "Excellent work, Lieutenant," Madsen acknowledged, his expression unreadable. Thorn scanned the faces of the other SEALs. "Anyone else feel like challenging the lieutenant's new record?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of tired resignation. He already knew the answer. No one would risk embarrassing themselves in front of General by trying to top a perfect run. The silence stretched, filled only by the desert wind. And then a soft voice cut through it from the side of the range. "May I try?" Every head swiveled in unison. Elara stood there, near the equipment racks, still holding a mop. She looked small and out of place amidst the hardened soldiers. For a beat, there was only stunned silence. Then it erupted. Laughter, loud, incredulous, and mocking, rolled across the range. Jax threw his head back and roared, slapping his thigh. "The janitor wants to shoot." "Oh, this is rich," he exclaimed, turning to his teammates. "Go on, Gunny. Let her." Might be the most entertainment we get all day. Let's see if she can even lift the rifle." The other operators joined in the jeering. General Madsen watched the scene unfold with a frown, but said nothing. Thorne hesitated, his gaze fixed on Elara. He looked past the gray uniform, past the mop, and into her eyes. There was no fear, no bravado, just a quiet, unnerving certainty that seemed completely at odds with her station. He remembered her words about the wind, her perfect, unconscious stance. His gut, honed by decades of combat, told him something was happening here that no one understood. He made a decision. Instead of handing her a rifle, Thorne unholstered his personal sidearm from the drop-leg holster on his thigh. It was a heavily customized SIG Sauer P320, a weapon that was an extension of his own hand, its weight and balance familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He offered it to her, grip first. "You know how to use this?" he asked, his voice a low challenge that silenced the remaining snickers. Elara took the pistol. The moment her hand closed around the custom-stippled grip, a change occurred. It was subtle at first, then profound. The woman who had spent months hunched over a mop bucket straightened. Her shoulders squared. Her breathing became slow, controlled, and rhythmic. The vacant, downcast look in her eyes vanished, replaced by a focus so intense, so predatory, that it sent a literal chill down Thorne's spine. Her finger rested perfectly alongside the trigger guard, a display of ingrained weapon discipline that was second nature, not learned from a manual. She stepped up to the firing position, and the transformation was complete. She was no longer a janitor. She was a weapon. The air around her seemed to crackle with a contained, lethal energy. The range fell utterly silent. Even Jax watched with narrowed eyes, his smirk fading into a look of confusion. Elara assumed a textbook shooting stance. She raised the pistol, sighted down the barrel, and took a single, deep, cleansing breath. Then she fired. 5 shots. The reports were so close together, they sounded like a single, violent burst from an automatic weapon. The sound echoed across the desert, sharp and final. All eyes snapped to the digital scoreboard. It flickered, processing the data. Then, the numbers flashed in stark, bright red. Score, 500/500. Time, 3.1 SEC. New range record. No one spoke. No one moved. The SEALs exchanged glances of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Jax's face, tanned by the desert sun, had gone pale, his jaw slack with shock. It wasn't just that she had hit all the targets. It was the impossible speed, the machine-like precision. It wasn't just good. It was perfect. Beginner's luck, someone finally muttered, breaking the spell, though the words lacked any conviction. Before Thorne could respond, General Madsen pushed his way through the stunned operators, his face a mask of dawning recognition and utter astonishment. He stopped directly in front of Elara, studying her face, his authoritative voice now quiet with something akin to awe. "Colonel Vance," he breathed, the name hanging in the air like a ghost. "My God, you're alive." Elara straightened slightly at the use of her name, a reflexive, military response she couldn't suppress. "Sir," she acknowledged, the single word carrying a weight of command and discipline that no janitor could ever possess. The general stared at her, then at Thorne, the pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "Gunny," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Operation Artemis, it wasn't a failure after all." 20 minutes later, they were in a SCGF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a windowless, soundproofed briefing room buried deep within the command building. The air was cold and sterile. Outside the single vault-like door, 2 armed military police stood guard. At the table sat General Madsen, a humbled and silent Jax, a confused and grim-faced gunnery Sergeant Thorne, and Elara. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the table before her. The transformation from the range hadn't entirely faded. She no longer carried the meekness of a maintenance worker, but she hadn't fully assumed the mantle of a senior officer, either. She existed in a quiet, undefined space between 2 identities. 3 years ago, General Madsen began, his voice low and somber. Colonel Elara Vance was the lead architect of our most classified Special Operations Marksmanship program. Gunnery Sergeant, the entire methodology you teach here at the Crucible, the stress inoculation, the variable condition drills, the neural feedback protocols, it was all her design. Thorne stared at Elara with a new, profound respect. He had been teaching her doctrine, her very philosophy of combat shooting without ever knowing it. She didn't just create the course. The general continued, his face grim. She set the benchmarks. Her final mission was to embed with a forward recon team in Afghanistan to field test new stealth optics in hostile territory. The team was ambushed in the Karengal Valley. We received confirmation that all operators were killed. Colonel Vance was officially listed as Kia, killed in action. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. 18 months later, a deep cover asset reported seeing an American woman held in a remote compound near the Pakistan border. The description matched Colonel Vance. We mounted a Black Ops extraction. We got her back, but the woman we recovered had suffered severe physical and psychological trauma. Elara listened to the story of her own life and death as if it were about a stranger, her face betraying no emotion. The doctors at Walter Reed diagnosed her with extensive PTSD and dissociative amnesia, Madsen explained. She had lost almost all of her episodic memory, her personal history, her identity, but her procedural memory, her skills, remained locked away. Rather than risk further trauma with aggressive therapy, Psych Services recommended a radical, experimental protocol. Code name, Operation Artemis. Thorne's eyes widened with dawning comprehension. You placed her here, at the very facility she designed. Precisely, Madsen confirmed. The theory was that familiar routines and environments might gradually, gently, restore her memories without the pressure of her former identity. Her service record was sealed at the highest level. Her identity was scrubbed. Only a handful of people in the entire Department of Defense knew she was alive, let alone here, mopping your floors. Jax shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the full weight of his months of casual mockery toward a decorated, war-traumatized superior officer crashing down on him. I remember the calculations, Elara said suddenly. Her voice was quiet but clear, and every head turned toward her. I remember modeling wind resistance and trajectory decay, the optimal target placement to test cognitive load under stress. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. I don't remember being a colonel. 6 months later, the Crucible operated at a level of excellence that shattered even its own legendary reputation. Under the combined leadership of Gunnery Sergeant Thorne and Special Technical Advisor Vance, the program was producing operators whose scores were redefining the limits of tactical marksmanship. Elara stood on the firing line, her hair still in its practical bun, but now she wore tactical pants and a simple black instructor's polo instead of a gray uniform. She stood beside a young SEAL who was struggling with a final, high-angle qualification course. The desert wind had kicked up, gusting unpredictably. "Remember," she said, her voice calm and steady over the wind's howl, "the wind doesn't control your shot. You control your reaction to it. Breathe. Trust the data. Trust yourself." The young operator nodded, made a micro-adjustment to his scope based on her earlier instruction, took a breath, and fired. He completed the course with his best score to date. "Well done," she acknowledged with a small, rare smile. Across the range, Thorne watched the exchange with a deep sense of approval. The transformation in Elara had been remarkable. While most of her specific memories remained stubbornly out of reach, she had forged a new identity, integrating her fractured past with her tangible present. She wasn't the ghost of Colonel Vance, nor was she simply Elara the janitor. She was something new, something whole, forged in the very crucible she had designed. As the day's training concluded and the operators departed, Elara remained behind, watching the sun dip below the jagged desert horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Thorne joined her, standing beside her in comfortable silence for several minutes before speaking. "Another good day," he observed. "They're getting better," she agreed. "Ryder especially. He's finally learning that humility is a greater asset than pride. You've had a good influence on him. On all of them. Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I read more of my file last night, she said after a moment. Thorn waited, letting her find her words. Operation Artemis. I designed it to identify and train shooters who could operate beyond conventional parameters. A small, ironic smile touched her lips. The irony isn't lost on me that I became my own test subject. And what's your professional assessment of the subject? Thorn asked with a hint of gentle humor. For the first time, Elara let out a soft, genuine laugh. A sound so unexpected it momentarily startled them both. Promising, she answered, but unorthodox. They stood together as darkness fell over Fort Irwin. I may never remember everything, Elara said finally, her voice soft but firm. But I'm starting to realize that might be okay. Who I was shaped who I am, whether I remember the details or not. Thorn nodded in understanding. We're defined by what we do, Gunny always said, not just by what we remember. Exactly, she agreed, turning back toward the lights of the main building. And right now, what I do is train the best marksman in the world. That feels like enough. As they walked back together, neither Colonel nor Janitor, but something uniquely her own, Elara felt a sense of peace. It had nothing to do with recovered memories and everything to do with a discovered purpose. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that a person's value is not defined by their title, but by their actions. True strength often lies hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. What does her journey make you think about? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comment below. And if you were moved by this story, please consider sharing it and subscribing for more tales of extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Comment respect to honor all those who serve in silence.